Hey everybody, welcome back to Battle Ready Inc. So at this point, we are in the height of BT7. We've had some major tournaments come and gone, and we have just a few more to go before we start to enter that lull of waiting for the next set. So while we're at this peak, I really wanted to take a step back and review our BT7 prediction list, our meta prediction list, kind of see where we fell on it before, and then kind of rearrange and just kind of take the data that we have and reapply it, and then make an assessment of where decks have now fallen, now that we can really see where the meta has currently settled, and will probably stay this way for the rest of BT7 until BT8 and the new starter decks come out. However, before we do that, I do need to pick a winner from our video from last week. This was our giveaway for our BT9 pulls that we had, and so we're going to just pick a random comment from the comment section to see who's going to get the ones that they wanted here. Joe McDonald, looks like torn between Gallantmon and Wargreymon. I'll take either, to be honest. Channel's choice. So yeah, I'll get that Wargreymon sent to you. Just go ahead and email me. You go to my the YouTube page there, and then you'll go to the last tab of the About section, and then there is my email address. So just shoot me an email address with your address from the what you made the comment with. All right, Joe? Also, don't forget our memory marker that came out this month is going to be Dorimon. So if you're playing some X-Antibody, this is a great memory marker for that. Definitely one to pick up and get your hands on. It's handmade out of clay by my wife, as always, hand-painted as well. You can find that on our Etsy page, link in the description below. You can also get all of our previous memory markers we've had on the channel, as well as some of our Battle Ready Ink merch, like our game mats, as well as our sleeves. All right, so here we go. This is where our list fell in our last prediction list. So before BT7 even came out, we knew about the ban list and, like, you know, the impacts that we were going to have there, such as Ice Wall, Reinforced Memory Boost, as well as Mega Digimon Fusion being banned completely. So this is kind of where we fell on the list. The biggest thing here is Lilithmon. I didn't want to put Lilithmon on the list because I literally had no clue. We saw it at the end of BT6 and EX1 being like this rogue deck that was insanely powerful, but it was only ever really powerful in like a select few players' hands. Lilith Loop is just one of those decks that not every player can pick up, and I still like kind of stand by that Lilith Loop players, like the best of them, is who it makes this deck work, but not anyone can just play this deck. It really takes a very special pilot to make this deck good. So this is going to be like the first one that we're going to address, is where does Lilith Loop fall? And we've seen it multiple times so far in the hands of Ying or Human, depending on which tournament you followed. He has made it to top cut numerous times. He took first place in the PPG Online Invitational. It was a 128-man tournament. He took first place in that. Okay, he knocked me out in top 4. So yeah, this is a pretty powerful deck. Okay, we've seen the speed of it. He made it to the top 4 of the Arlington Digifest with this deck. Out of 500 plus players. Yeah, so this deck is definitely still powerful, okay? But again, I don't want to put it in like B tier as like a rogue punch-up category. I think it's a little bit better than that, but again, I think it's a very tricky deck to use. It is incredibly fast, it draws fast, it decks out fast. So if you're not a very like conscious player of everything, you need to know the meta, you need to know everything, every like nuance of your opponent's deck and how to play against every single deck of the meta. You need to know the ins and outs of your deck extremely well, I think, to do well with this. So I'm going to put it in A tier, but I'm going to put it in the bottom of A tier simply because of like the level of like player level needed for this deck is like through the roof. All right, so now let's take a look at some of the other stuff we've got here. First one I want to move out of A tier is Bonds. Bonds of Friendship here. Ultimately, while the deck sort of is fast, it's got good removal. In a tamer format, you can't do a whole lot of removing if there's nothing to remove, right? And in addition to that, having to hurt yourself is, always a drawback. And then the consistency. I mean, we've seen it before. Just it can be a little bit bricky. Sometimes you just don't draw into your important pieces. So that can definitely hurt the deck a lot. So we're definitely going to pull it out of A tier. And I think we're going to throw it somewhere near the bottom-ish of B tier. Again, I think it has too much against it compared to a lot of other decks. A lot of other decks in this meta are so consistent, particularly the hybrids. So one hybrid deck that I do want to move up is going to be red. Wow, red. I think this is the biggest one that I underestimated, clearly because of where I placed it. Was not fair to it. Whenever I initially made this, there was a few things that I did not realize at the time. One of which was like the Takumi trick, where you can place all those sources underneath him and then not actually digivolve him into Imperialdramon, and then instead go into like another Evo chain with just like a level 4. I didn't know that at the time when I made this list. And there's a few other things. Also, like building up into an ancient, like literally evoing him on top of like a level 5, very, very powerful, and then swing for just literally all your opponent's checks. It has a tremendous amount of search. So imagine an OTK deck that has 3 different searcher rookies. So between the Bokomons and the 2 Flamemons, the power of this deck and the consistency is astounding. And then Aldemon being able to turn off option cards is a good counter to yellow. So I definitely want to move it up into a B tier. I think putting it right above green feels pretty right, honestly. I think right here is right about where it needs to be. It's really strong. It had a tremendous showing in several different tournaments, and I think it's got a lot of power to it. I think it's a low floor, low ceiling kind of deck. It's very much a simple, straightforward deck, very powerful, and then very straightforward. Not a whole lot of like nuance, like trickiness to it, like other decks can have. So because of that, it can be kind of outplayed a little bit. I think in Arlington, I think I played red hybrid 4 times and I only lost to it once. And I stand by that. The only reason I lost to that is because I didn't see the rookie and raising area underneath the opponent's deck next to the trash. It just threw me off because of where the raising area was. I think that was like the biggest issue. If it hadn't been for that, like just obvious mistake, and I had just evoed into like a healer, like Jet, I think I would have won that match and I would have, beat all of them. So, I think it's an awkward deck. It's extremely powerful. It's very, very good. I just don't think it can outperform some of these other decks, especially if these other decks are played well. We've seen a tremendous amount of representation of it, and it make it far, but we've never like really seen it take top cut too much. There has been a few tournaments where it has done really well, and it has made top cut. It's just not as consistently in those like very final matches as like some of these other decks we're going to talk about. So next, let's bring another one down, Justimon. So Justimon hasn't been hit by the ban list yet, so it still has its savior. It has that through the end of April. But Mulligans is also helping it tremendously. So just being so much more consistent with Mulligans, just being able to put a bad hand to the bottom and then drawing a whole new 5, very good for the deck. I mean, it really helps thin out a tremendous amount. However, that said, I still think it's in an awkward position. It's got good matchups, but it can be a little slow. And so some of these other super fast decks can outperform it a little bit. So I think dropping it down, we'll still keep it in A tier, but I think moving it down here to the lower end of A tier, like feels okay. Still A tier, okay, guys? So if you're playing Justimon, you're still in a good position. We've seen it do very well, and it's still in a great position. It still has a delicate plan. It has Judgment Blade. It's got 4 saviors. It's still very, very powerful, and it's going to be in a good spot through the rest of this format, I think. Green, we've really seen Christmas Hybrid come out like super hard. Just being able to play, like the red option, Atomic Inferno to get multiple security attack bonuses, and then the deck just goes ham on the opponent and then clears it. So it's really, really powerful, as well as like doing piercing and things like that. So you're clearing your opponent's field as well as getting your security checks. Very powerful deck. I think it's probably right where it needs to be. It can be a little clunky. It doesn't have like the search power or the draw power as some of these other decks, and I think that kind of hurts it a little bit. But that's really the only drawback to it, is that it's just not as consistent with as many draw cards as others. It's got cards like the Betamon, but the Betamon isn't as good because it only adds level 4s. Level 4 hybrids, I don't know why it's not like Flamebon and Truebeamon, where it's just level 4 or higher hybrids. I think that would have been a much better card. So I think it's hurting a little bit. So really, it's only got like Bokomon. So it's in an awkward spot, but it's still very powerful when it does pop off. All right, so next we've got yellow here, yellow hybrid, yellow purple hybrid. Crazy powerful. I think it's definitely like in the top 2, top 3 decks of the format. Sometimes you'll see it, take a tournament. Sometimes it'll, make top cut. I got 3rd place at PPG with it. But then we look at Arlington, right? And then in Arlington at DigiFest, we had 1 in top 16. Like, that's all I saw was 1 in top 16. I think it made it to top 8, but it fell out of top 8. And that was it. And so we haven't really seen it do much else. I think it can be played around. If you play extremely fast and you just don't let your opponent set up with their yellow, you can really, really take it. Play around the purple option and then just kind of go ham on this security really, really fast before they can build up too much. So yeah, it is still very powerful, but it's hit or miss. Now, the big one. Okay, so we've got 2 different blue hybrid decks here. We've got the Magna Garurumon running like Koji, as well as the Truebeamon that lets you play Koji for free, things like that. That is what this Magna Garurumon represents right here, and I don't think that's the way to go. I was pretty firm in it whenever I made my deck profile for Azulongmon. I think the Azulongmon variant was better, and then the Magna Garurumon, you have to play a lot of awkward cards, I think, like Koji's kind of awkward in it and things like that. Magna himself is really good, but the cards that like really help boost him are kind of dead in other Evo chains and things like that. So not really too big a fan of that. Now, blue hybrid itself is still extremely powerful. So as long as you're playing blue hybrid, whether it's this version or another version, I think you're still going to do good. So I'm going to drop it down a little bit. I think we're going to drop it right about there. Still going to be an A tier. It's still blue hybrid. At the end of the day, it's still blue hybrid. It's still got all these great blue hybrid cards. Like, you still got, both the level 4 main Tommy ones and Beowulf and stuff like that. So you're still in a great position to do phenomenal things. So we're going to keep it in A tier. Just drop it down a little bit. And now we've got blue hybrid itself. This is the big one, mainly just focusing on stunning, right? You're running your Korikakus, you're running your Beowulfs to bounce the Korikakus back to hand, to Evo the Korikakus again. You're playing, stuff like Tommy, things like that. So you're just doing tons and tons of stunning. And then I think I'm still going to stay strong on it. A Azulongmon build is the best way. So like 2 Azulongmons in this deck, just with like the base package, I think it's a great way to go. You can run stuff like your memory blockers as well as your memory reduction blockers as well. You can get both in the same deck. I think that's very powerful. Tons of source removal to proc your duo tamers. So a lot of these decks that have duo tamers, sometimes they have an issue of like actually procking them. Like yellow, for example, only works if your security is lower than your opponent's. Well, if your opponent just never attacks until it's ready, you're never going to get any value off that duo tamer, which is really, really frustrating. Whereas blue, they can be offensive and be like, yep, I removed the source. Now you've got nothing, and then I'm going to stun that. So now you can't even attack with it and have it deleted. So blue can do all these different things to be, trigger their own duo tamer, which I think is really powerful. So I think blue hybrid, unfortunately, is gonna have to go in the number 1 slot. We've just seen it consistently do phenomenally. I think it had 5 of the top 8 reps at Arlington in top 8. We've seen it made the finals of the PPG tournament. Now let's look at some of these other decks, though. Some of these B tier decks. Truebeamon just doing phenomenally. Absolutely. Had a crazy good representation out of Arlington. Just one of those decks that was super slow at first, and then it just like caught on like wildfire, and saw it do tremendously well. I think another good thing about it is a lot of people don't know how to play against it. It is a very tricky deck to kind of counter. And sometimes countering it still isn't even a good idea. So like deleting the Truebeamon is not always the best idea. Things like that. This deck is very good. I still think it's going to be kind of roguish. I've seen it played a lot, but I haven't seen it top or make top cut yet. So until it can actually make the top cut and do extremely well, I'm going to keep it in rogue, but it's one of those rogue decks that can just punch up super well into A tier. Like against some of these A tier decks just absolutely wrecks them. Like yellow, I think it just demolishes yellow because, you know, delete the Truebeamon, and then what? Then you got to face a horde of Digimon. And it's a very fast deck. It is a very, very fast deck that's hard to deal with. I think it doesn't have a bad matchup against blue, though. So that's its drawback, is blue really shuts down the deck. And if blue's the most played and like the best deck of the format, then it's going to have a really hard time getting up into that A tier. Next, Purple Rush. I'm going to go ahead and move Purple Rush up here as well, next to Truebeamon. So this is like the Beelzemon, Beelstarmon running a lot of controlling options. And then just like the level 4 rush with the scatter mode, the Eyesmon, the promotes, if they're running Ogremon, you know, whichever build they're going with, this deck is so fast. I mean, it just clears security so hard, and it's just so hard to shut down. It's very similar to this Lilith Loop deck up here, where it's just like super, super fast. It's very, very rush heavy. Super consistent because it plays such an abundance of level 3s and level 4s that it's really hard for it to brick. So it's very straightforward. Just go ham. If your opponent puts up any kind of pressure against you, you just, you know, place a couple options, remove those threats, or Beelstarmon to remove some threats, whatever it takes. Then Evo defeat on top of the Beelstarmon to like clear a tamer, swing the defeat dies, pop a Digimon on field. Yeah, so very, very good deck. Also, I'm kind of surprised it's not as good. I mean, I'm surprised it's not as played. I want to put it in A tier, but I've yet to see it even taken to one of these top tournaments, let alone in any sort of like big quantity or done well with. I've seen it destroy in small tournaments, like locals. I've seen it do phenomenally well, or even like smaller tournaments. One of my friends on Facebook was in a 3-man tournament and, you know, did tremendously well with this deck. Took first, I think, in like 2 different tournaments back to back. So really, really awesome deck for sure. Diaboromon, another one of those decks that's real awkward. When it pops off, it is a nightmare to deal with. Okay, those tokens are such a nuisance to deal with for a lot of decks. Any kind of control decks are really kind of struggle here. Even blue, with all of blue stuns, struggle here because there's just so many tokens on board that you can only stun so many targets. Right now, when a Zulongmon comes out, Zulongmon absolutely punishes the deck for sure. But again, it's just, if the consistency isn't there, if you have to Evo into a very specific Evo stack and you don't have that very specific Evo stack, the deck will suffer. So we're going to keep it kind of mid-range B tier, I think. When it pops off, it's almost unbeatable, but it doesn't pop off nearly as often as most of these other decks do. Imperialdramon, I think, is in a good position right where it's at. We're about to see this deck just take on a whole new form once the starter deck comes out, and then once BT8 is here, this deck is going to be a nightmare. I hope you're ready. And then I think this is probably the last deck I want to talk about, is Dorisgoramon here. Completely underestimated this deck. I kind of treated it as a lot of these other like decks that involve having to build up a very specific stack, like Justimon or Imperial or Diaboromon. Like, I really kind of put it like that. You know, if you brick on it, you're real bad. It sucks. But you know what? This deck made it to top 8 out of 500 players. So I've got to give it credit, okay? I can't keep it in the bottom of B tier with a lot of these other guys. I have to move this deck up. I'm going to put it in the top of B tier, okay? I think it sits probably technically right around Truebeamon's power level, but since it does have the top, whereas Truebeamon didn't, I'll put it one step above Truebeamon. This deck, wow. Cards that make it so you can't delete it, okay? That dodges so much stuff, like, you know, all these removal options, things like that. Really, really good. Being able to swing and delete your opponent's Digimon on field, delete 2 targets on field in one attack, is extremely powerful. Having just huge DP to swing over even Susanomons, I think that's really like underestimated, honestly. Crazy powerful. The build we saw with the Chaosmon, being able to swing into your opponent's Digimon, like their big threats, like a Susanomon, being able just to attack into that, stuff like that. There's just so much that you can do with this deck, and I think it's what's really nice about it is just how versatile it actually is. It's not as one-trick pony as you think it is. When you actually kind of see like the builds and how people are playing it, that aren't doing the one-trick pony, you're like, okay, now I see like the top end of this deck. I think it's very much a high floor and even higher ceiling deck. You have to, I mean, you could play it pretty low floor, but I think to play it right, you know, maybe low floor, high ceiling is maybe the correct way. In the hands of a very, very skilled player that really, really studies the deck and sticks with it and gets better and better. I think that same thing as kind of Lilithmon is they can be a formidable threat and punch up and take out all of these decks. I really think they can. Both of these decks here can punch up into this and take out any of these decks in the hands of a good player. And that's one of my favorite things about Digimon, to talk about this in pretty much all of these videos, is that B tier is one of these tiers that in the hands of a good player, these decks can definitely punch up and take on any deck in A tier. I think just you got to really be dedicated to the deck. I think you have to stick with it and improve it and know your opponent's decks as well as your own. A lot of people really, I don't think they think about it in like that dimension of, I know my deck really well. You know, I know the perfect combos to do all the time in every situation, but then they don't think about, well, I don't know my opponent's deck. I don't know what my opponent's deck does at all. You know, oh, it's blue. It stuns and it removes sources. Okay, yeah, it does that. But like, what are all the different combos? Like, what are the things you have to worry about? It's like, okay, they're at 3 memory. What are all the different plays they can do? What do I need to be worried about? You know, people don't really think in that kind of aspect a lot of times. And the players that are really good at punching up into A tier with these B tier decks are the players that think about those sort of matchups and in those sort of situations. So if you can do that, you can absolutely take any of these decks and then come up here and play with the big dogs in A tier. Absolutely.